Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am Dave Brown, and this is the New Populist. Well, I have a very interesting video for you today. Just recently, there was a paper released by the ISW, which is the Institute for the Study of War, concerning China and strategies for the United States in combating China, specifically about this Taiwan situation. Now, why is this important? Well, our U.S. politicians often are led by these think tanks that get funding from the military-industrial complex. So if a prominent think tank is saying something, we need to pay attention. And just to make my point, let's look back at Russia. 2016, we have the U.S. presidential primaries with Trump jumping in. And then when he got progressed in the primary and became the candidate for the Republicans, he was accused of being a stooge for Putin. Russia controlled him. We had the dossier. We had the Russian hacking of the DNC. And when he became president, all that Russia heat just turned up even more, to the point in 2018 when he temporarily withheld lethal aid to Ukraine. He was impeached. And of course, that lethal aid was going to Ukraine so Ukraine could fight Russia. How do we know that? Because in 2019, the RAND Corporation released a paper saying, here's how we potentially destabilize and unbalance Russia. And one of their strategies was giving Ukraine weapons to fight the Russians. And voila, 3 years later, we have this Ukraine-Russia conflict. And so the RAND Corporation told us, if we were paying attention in 2019, what the U.S. strategy would be in order to lure Russia into a long conflict that would be very costly for them. And of course, this would also destroy Ukraine in the process. But hey, we're America, we're not Ukraine. We like to use proxies to do our dirty work. So sucks for Ukraine, good for the neoconservative policymakers in Washington, D.C. So back to China, the ISW. What is the background of the ISW? Well, the ISW was founded by Kimberly Kagan, who was married to the author of this paper, Frederick Kagan. And Frederick Kagan is the brother of Robert Kagan, who is the co-founder of PNAC, the Project for a New North American Century, the neoconservative think tank that helped plan the Iraq War. It's a small world, right? And Robert Kagan is married to Victoria Nuland, who is the number 2 in the State Department and who is the leading official on Ukraine. She was on the ground back in 2013, 10 years ago, helping to foment this coup in Ukraine and overthrow the Russia-friendly government. So if these people are involved, the ISW, we need to pay attention. So what is the name of this article, this paper from the ISW? And the article is called China's 3 Roads to Controlling Taiwan. Now, this is a long 26-page paper, so I want to just focus on the parts that interest us as far as understanding what the American strategy might be to try to contain China and to prevent this reunification of China and Taiwan. And the intro to the article, the first paragraph, says this: U.S. policy to defend Taiwan from Chinese aggression is overly focused on the risk that China will attempt an amphibious invasion of Taiwan. The U.S. is not paying sufficient heed to Chinese efforts to regain control of Taiwan through persuasion and coercion. And U.S. strategies to block a Chinese invasion may actually undermine efforts to block the persuasion and coercion roads to Chinese success. Xi Jinping likely prefers to accomplish his aims by means short of war. Those roads offer Xi the prospect of success at much lower risk and cost than fighting a war. The U.S. must develop strategies to defeat these campaigns while deterring an invasion. Well, very true. Certainly, China does not want war, But I would point out, too, that Putin spent 8 years trying to prevent war with Ukraine. They had the Minsk agreements where they would allow the Donbass to be neutral and have a ceasefire and stop hostilities, and that was not observed. Leading up into the invasion in 2022, Putin made other offers to the West that were completely ignored. So with Russia and Putin, they did try the more peaceful solution, but the West blocked them, which is why they finally invaded in February of 2022. So the question is, if we, the United States, again, block the coercion and persuasion avenues, will that force China to just use the military strategy or the military option and invade Taiwan? That's the concern. The paper goes on. Beijing faces a difficult set of choices between military considerations and geopolitical dilemmas that U.S. discussions of a putative Chinese invasion often fail to consider adequately. A military optimal Chinese invasion strategy would require that the People's Liberation Army strike American bases in Japan, a U.S. treaty ally, and Guam, U.S. territory, early in a conflict. Such attacks would bring the U.S. fully into the war and expand the conflict to include Japan and other East Asian states. American strategists may worry that the U.S. would not commit fully even after Guam was attacked, or that the Japanese would try to remain neutral, but neither scenario is likely. Now, the concern here that they have is that if China were to attack U.S. bases, we wouldn't respond. I'm pretty sure the United States is going to respond, as well we should if our bases in Japan are just hit. Will that happen? Well, does China want to bring the U.S. into a war with them directly? I don't think so. Xi is not stupid. That's not good for anybody, for China or the United States. So that scenario, again, is not likely, which is why they say Xi is leaning toward using persuasion, using being coercive, and not this military option. The article goes on. Xi has no reason to be confident in outcomes that will be optimal for China. Such attacks, after all, would be even more radical moves than Vladimir Putin's have been in Europe. American strategists cannot take for granted that the U.S. and its allies will behave optimally. But Xi cannot dismiss the possibility that they would. He will thus face an unpleasant choice once he decides to invade: accept the risk of expanding the war greatly, or leave fully operational the bases from which a possible devastating U.S. military response might come. These considerations, among others, make strategies of persuasion, coercion, and military isolation short of invasion far more attractive to Xi. For that reason, it says the U.S. must urgently reorient its approach to defending Taiwan against all three of China's roads to controlling the island. Deterring and ability to defeat an invasion are necessary, but insufficient conditions for success in maintaining the status quo, a de facto independent Taiwan. U.S. approaches to these challenges must reinforce rather than undermine U.S. and coalition efforts to defeat China's persuasion and coercion campaigns. So they're saying, yes, we're paying attention to the military side, but the U.S. must pay attention to the other side, the more peaceful side, coercion and persuasion. And I wonder, the nature of those efforts. And as the article or the paper goes to point out, it's not exactly clear how they would do this. This is where the energy, though, needs to go to block all the roads for China to get involved or to absorb Taiwan finally into China. Now, the paper goes on to say that if China attacks Taiwan and the United States does not intervene, Taiwan will be destroyed. And so the question I have for the Taiwanese is, do you trust the United States to be there for you to the very end? Will the United States actually risk direct confrontation with China, a nuclear power, that could lead to a nuclear war. How confident are you? And what I would say to you is past actions are a predictor of future behavior. What has happened to other countries that the United States helped? Has it always worked out for them? Let's think back. Vietnam, Afghanistan, and now we have this current war in Ukraine. How will this end here? Probably the same way as the other two, which is what is so sad. We lead countries on, we help them to their own destruction. Ukraine is being destroyed, and my fear is that we are leading on Taiwan to their own destruction. And let me just say, too, this is not a judgment on the Taiwanese or the Chinese or the United States. I'm just looking at the scenarios and what is likely. And I want a peaceful solution if possible. I do not want lives to be lost. So I'm making no judgment of the Chinese. I'm not saying what they're doing is good or bad. Same with the United States. I'm simply pointing out what is best for Taiwan as far as saving lives and preventing a huge war that could be cataclysmic for not just Taiwan, but perhaps the entire world. And that is my concern. So we have this paper from the ISW. It's telling us what the United States must do to counteract or counterbalance China and contain them and keep them away from Taiwan. So now we have the road laid out for us, just like with Russia. Will this road lead to a confrontation? And it is possible. And now we're paying attention and we see it coming. So it should not be a surprise if it does happen in the future. Well, that's it for now. Again, if you are new to this channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.